Persona 3 FEZ's epilogue, The Answer, or as it was known in Japan, episode Aigis, continues and wraps up the story of Persona 3's main game, titled The Journey or Episode Yourself. Instead of being a single expanding dungeon with Tartarus, The Answer has you dungeon crawling through 7 shorter dungeons within the abyss of time, each ending with more story at the end of them for what is roughly a 30-hour experience that has different gameplay structure and subsequently changes from their base games. Outside of Japan, if you bought the original Persona 3, the full game of Persona 3 FEZ had to be purchased again to access The Answer. In Japan, you could buy Persona 3 FEZ, or there was a cheaper version of FEZ available to players that required a copy or save file of the original Persona 3 to boot up. If you didn't know that that's actually how the append version worked, be sure to watch my full version port review of Persona 3. But meanwhile, for Persona 3 Reload, episode Aigis is a DLC expansion, though this DLC expansion is marketed as a pass, with waves of DLC, so the idea is that all this other content in addition to episode Aigis justifies the price. Having said that, I was provided a key for episode Aigis, and normally when I get keys I'm still buying at least another version of that same game, but that's uniquely not the case here, and either way, I should make a note that the price point of the DLC has been a hot topic. Additionally, both epilogues build off of their base games heavily, so we'll be outlining changes from their base games for a clearer perspective. While episode Aigis is the original Japanese name and remains true for Reload, since The Answer can only refer to FEZ on PS2, we'll distinguish the two versions as The Answer and episode Aigis. The Answer is considered controversial for a number of reasons, both gameplay-wise and writing-wise, but with accessible resources available and player experience today that people on game forums didn't have 15 years ago, The Answer really is a lot of things, but it's at least probably not as difficult as you may have heard. As far as the writing goes, people may prefer one version over the other, or prefer how one version executed certain aspects over the other. Commenting on the writing of either version is a minefield, and I'll do my best to metaphorically briefly explain where the mines are located. In The Answer, FEZ mechanics are still present, and you should watch the main game's port review to see what is unique there, but we did actually miss a few things, so it wouldn't hurt to refresh on some of the more relevant mechanics to The Answer. There's no party control, but tactics was functional, unlike tactics in Persona games after it. Unlike the base game of FEZ, all tactics are available from the start, buffs can't be extended, AoE attacks need to down everyone for a one more, but on the flip side, being down means losing a turn. Shuffle time doesn't let you pick the card you want, you can double up in shuffle time. Item cards in shuffle time give equipment. Inherited skills are random, so you can't pick them, so if you want any, you'll have to repeatedly check the fuse results. Party member skills upgrade automatically, so you can't pick which skills they keep. Unless there's enemy advantage, the player always goes first. Makara-Karn and Tetra-Karn apply to everyone rather than one person, and most police station equipment on PS2 have random effects that you can't see until you buy them. With that reminder on what FEZ is like, the biggest change to The Answer is that there's no calendar system, which has both its advantages and disadvantages. For example, with no calendar, there is no tiredness mechanic to worry about, so you are free to leave dungeons without anyone bailing on you. On the flip side, there is no compendium in The Answer, which is big in and of itself, but combined with no social links, you can't get any bonus XP when fusing anymore. With these core changes, you'll need to fuse more deliberately and carefully, putting more pressure on cycling inherited skills. You do still get access to B-Blue V, the police station, antique store, and pharmacy, but there's no weapon fusions anymore, and the party members won't occasionally buy their own equipment, which was something they could do in FEZ. It's also known how in The Answer, when you leave a dungeon, you'll have to enter from either the first floor or a checkpoint floor unlocked after beating a boss, meaning you'll have to trek up all of the floors with enough SP and HP to fight a boss. Now, we mentioned in the original port review how prior to Reload, you can easily climb up floors by splitting the party up and letting them find the stairs for you. Enemies only spawn if they're near the player, so as long as you stay still and out of the way, they'll never fight. So if you do leave a dungeon, you can quickly get back to where you were via this method. You can also do this to farm items, but you can't farm money with it. People stress leveling in The Answer too, so let's talk about that. The XP shown to you at the end of battle is not split up like later Persona games. Everyone receives that much, alongside an extra amount depending on how much lower level they are, barring bosses where XP is fixed. However, Persona 3 does still give you a little more XP if you have less than 4 party members in the party, but if someone dies, their XP is not redistributed since it's not split to begin with. And a factor to consider in The Answer isn't that just you're grinding XP, but you're also ideally grinding personas to fuse. Enemy stats, skills, and elemental affinities were altered. Bosses are new though, and they're infamous in the answer for having evade skills for their weaknesses, and actually a number of regular enemies do too, which means you just gotta be more cognizant of using Sukukaja and Sukunda. The answer has no difficulty options, but save files actually confirm it's set to normal. I know it's a common myth that the answer is set to hard, so here is what the answer would actually look like if it were set to hard difficulty. I could show you this thanks to RVR0 finding the difficulty flags, and there is now a mod by them to change the difficulty of the answer at the desk if you want to play it on easy or hard. I've also made save files already set to the difficulties available if you don't want a mod. Now when you start the answer, you are warned it's more challenging than the journey, and this is true, but this is referring to the changes we've already stated. It's not referring to the literal difficulty setting. Metis is introduced as a playable party member, while Aigis alongside the party were rebalanced. After the first battle that you can't lose, you'll start at level 25. For the most part, some skills are earned at different levels and some key skills are notably obtained earlier. Aigis gains the wild card as the playable character, but she loses Orgia mode. Instead, Metis has Orgia mode, though hers is different in that her skills don't cost HP or SP while active. And unlike Makoto, Aigis can't use other weapon types, though her long range gives her an easier time getting player advantage, which will be more important here. She can also catch rare shadows easier, just like Makoto can when he uses a bow, though her gun is faster, which is nice since shadows in the answer are faster. Junpei, Koromaru, and Mitsuru were given 40 additional points spread across their base stats. Junpei gets his health regen passive right from the get-go. Mitsuru now has the highest magic stat on top of Ice Boost or Amp. Koromaru has the highest agility in addition to Masukukaja now, and in turn has ditched his ailments. He also gets Mudo skills earlier now. Ken also gets Hama skills and Meteorama earlier. Fuka meanwhile gets Escape Route 10 levels later. No Tiredness also means Vorpal Blade and Weary Thrust had to be tweaked for no status bonus. Fez also has a frustrating bug on PS3 we'll have to talk about, where at certain angles when holding down, your character doesn't move, and for the answer, this can easily get you killed. There's a handful of new music, and the battle theme is a remix of Mass Destruction. The answer also had new voice lines and new victory animations, adding some of its own flair.
You're unworthy of my time.
And from there, we have Persona 3 Reload Episode Aigis, also still known in Japan as Episode Aigis. Compared to the answer, Episode Aigis adds a handful of new scenes, party banter when you're exploring, Elizabeth requests and 59 of them, and many new interactions with the party in the dorm. And as you may have seen, Joker is now a super boss. Episode Aigis' localization is more accurate, though that's in minor ways. For example, on PS2, they had referred to students as freshmen, juniors, and seniors, but by the time of the answer on PS2, they had started saying first, second, and third year students, at least for middle school. But to stay consistent with the base game, they still had to use freshman, junior, and senior for high school. Reload and Episode Aigis consistently stay to first, second, and third year. The answer's localization in Fez doesn't deviate as far as, say, Junpei in the beginning of the game, where they punch up his jealousy, and in Reload, all we're really looking at is a round of revisions in that conversations flow more naturally, and dialogue is clearer or phrased better with the voice direction to follow it.
Are you saying people don't know how good they have it? You're sounding like an old man.
Hey, who asked you?
Wow, you've really grown up, Junpei-san.
I don't need to hear that from you.
So as far as localization goes, we're not really looking at accuracy, we're looking at the polish. An example is that the scientist's revelation being changed from personas do exist to people can use personas, removing the question of their existence. This is also just more accurate too. Now while the story remains identical, Reload does have rewritten scenes in both English and Japanese, which I believe were done in response to the answer's notoriety that goes back as far as the original release, and had the writing team asking themselves would their characters really say or do these things to their friends with as much vitriol. To keep it short, the goal of the rewritten scenes was two things. One, strengthen everybody's motivations as well as keep said motivations more consistent. And two, tone down the anger.
なんであんたが好きなのもうなんであんたが好きなのよもう
There is still frustration, but there's more ways to represent frustration than with anger. Now, how you feel about the writing changes can very well be subjective. Effectively, they of course corrected, but I think you could still argue that they overcorrected. There were also direction changes among the anime cutscenes too. Episode Aigis maintains anime cutscenes where the answer did, but without delving into the specifics of this example, the answer had a notably disturbing cutscene moment that was directed differently in episode Aigis, in that it dropped the shock value for seeing how that actually impacted the party. I will concede that we're welcome to feel that the changes weren't for the best, because that original scene was pretty raw as hell. Now with that all out of the way, let's get to gameplay. While the answer remained mechanically stagnant across the entire way, utilizing enemy parameters to keep you on your toes or maybe throwing special floors at you, episode Aigis progressively reintroduces all of Reload's new mechanics within the still 30-hour long experience to try its best to keep the experience from feeling as repetitive. Special floors from Reload returned, though the answer had one for all golden chests with no enemies, and that one didn't return. Episode Aigis has a difficulty selection, so it's not forced on normal, and everyone still starts at 25, so you'll need to unlock theurgies and passives again. The leveling curve is much more generous than in the answer, so you'll be leveling faster and capping out at a higher level than you would have in the same time frame as the original. Some enemy and boss stats were tweaked, though because of how Reload is balanced in the first place, many of the previously intimidating encounters aren't nearly as threatening. Moreover, since there's still no bonus XP when fusing, there's more personas that innately have growth on them, so you don't have to keep inheriting it as much as you did before. To compensate for Reload's combat being more in the player's favor thanks to new mechanics and more easily accessible features, bosses still get to evade their weaknesses, and even the final boss was buffed in that they shift resistances now, and they get to act twice on their turn. Meanwhile, the party still starts with their second tier of personas having practically the same skill pools from Reload's base game, except Aigis' skills were given to other characters, except for Primal Force. What stands out though is that everyone tends to get their skills later than they usually do in Reload. Aigis once again loses Orgia mode and still trades it for Makoto's wildcard, hence why her skills were redistributed. Instead of short swords, she'll still use her own weapon, which outside of combat has a reticle to show you where you're locked on. But also she gets access to fusion spell theurgies, some of which are new, and she maintains the same passive that scales with how much you filled out the compendium. Junpei doesn't start with his health regen now. Yukari was given Amrita Showers, Secunda and Masakunda, and Winamp in Reload, so she still gets them in episode Aigis as well. Fuka gets escape route significantly earlier than in the answer, though she gets it later than in Reload, and of course Oracle has her theurgy has no negative effects. Metis has a higher magic stat and was given resistance to physical attacks. She gets fast heal and instant heal but loses poison arrow, and she starts with assault dive and Tarukaja. She gets both of Aigis' theurgies, which this time Orgia mode is identical because Aigis' Orgia mode in Reload already didn't use HP or SP. She builds theurgy when Aigis shifts to her, and her passive when upgraded is a 40% attack buff when Aigis does shift to her. And for any skills that she has that other party members have, she tends to get them earlier than them. Other changes include starting you with 1 revival item instead of 5 medicine and 3 revival beads. Aigis' ambush will eventually break items as you run, and Aigis shots can be heard by enemies and cause them to approach you if you miss. Some changes that were introduced in Reload in general that we didn't mention in the prior port review include that poison doesn't stay after battle, being enraged doesn't make you attack twice anymore, and to flee from battle you need to wait out until Fuka can find time for you to flee, while in the original you would attempt to flee immediately but you could fail. The dungeon designs in episode Aigis are original to it and continue the trend of unique prefabs, though they are reused between dungeons in a similar manner to the answer. Monad doors now spawn in a pair of 3, the difference being how many consecutive battles you'll have to do in them, and thus increasing how much loot you'll get from them, which the loot from the Monad doors have random effects attached to them, and can be pretty strong effects too, making the loot from the doors very valuable. And when we say consecutive, we really do mean there are no breaks in the battles and you do not get do-overs. If you die in a Monad door, you can only reload a save. There's no retry and no going back to before you entered the door. And if you do the second or third door, you get a second card in Shuffle Time at the end. Shuffle Time works as it did in the base game of Reload, but I just wanted to clarify that item cards give you skill cards now and nothing like equipment like they did before. After the last bosses of any given block, you'll unlock 2 characters' theurgies, which the order of is seemingly random. You can return to the highest reach floor of the most recent door up until you've hit the next checkpoint door, saving you time time from having to retread floors via split up if you left through a teleporter or Fuka's escape route. This also means there's no saving clocks within the dungeons themselves anymore to save at, since you're so free to come and go anyway to save outside. Moreover, to refill HP and SP, you have to leave the Abyss of Time altogether, not just the dungeon you're in like in the answer. Leaving the Abyss of Time will refill your HP and SP, but it will also reset dungeon layouts and current major arcanas collected. All the same, you can still return to your latest floor though. While there are those incentives to stay in the Abyss of Time, there's also incentive to frequently leave as well. While Arcana Burst is a thing, there are some major arcanas that benefit from leaving and resetting the burst, such as permanent HP, stat, and SP upgrades. As you progress and after mid-bosses, you'll unlock items used to hang out with friends, which will be how you get passives and how you upgrade them, meaning you'll have to leave the Abyss of Time for those too. In Paulownia Mall, there's now a flower vendor that'll let you plant seeds, so you'll have to come back for them once they're grown. And once you've visited enough times, you'll be able to plant up to 5 seeds. Officer Kurosawa also gives you rewards as you progress. Chests that require Twilight Fragments to open return both randomly on floors and for the loot after bosses. You can collect Twilight Fragments in a similar manner to the base game, including from Elizabeth despite no social links for progression, and from around the dorm or mall, which also the locations of reset with progression. And you'll be spending them on those chests, the clock to restore HP and SP so you don't have to leave the Abyss of Time, and they're used on the Vermilion clock, which lets you duplicate a skill card. The Twilight Fragment chests on random floors also mean the return of the big clock that'll catch up in active party members' levels. In the Velvet Room, you now have access to a compendium that's even graciously filled out for you up to level 25. Moreover, you get access to your main saves compendium unless you're on Heartless difficulty, though that doesn't stop you from accessing DLC personas. The drawback is that those compendium prices are more expensive, though they get lower as you fill it out, just like in the base game. The answer only had 2-way and 3-way fusions, but episode Aigis has 2-way fusions and special fusions involving a number of different personas. Elizabeth's requests will include general progression, fusion requests, certain item drops from Monad doors, and a few items from the antique store. These requests reward you with things like outfits, new major arcanas, and increase how many major arcanas you can have in a run. Items that come from leveling personas are now used to craft accessories rather than just being accessories themselves. Casually, money won't naturally build up as much as in the answer, and the compendium gives you more incentive to spend. The pharmacy doesn't sell escape items, but it does have AoE healing items, 100% HP revives, and more party-wide ailment cures. Equipment you find in the dungeons will also be your go-to as well, so you still don't need to worry about the police station equipment at least. Though the police station equipment is cheaper than before anyway. Moreover, the antique store will let you craft a ton of equipment with item drops as well as craft skill cards. Lastly, B Blue V functions as it did in Reload, letting you swap party members' skills with ones they used to have. Episode Aigis has its own animated opening, in contrast to Fez's opening encompassing both the journey and the answer. The music is once again redone from the original. A number of new songs were also added for advantage in battle and additional cutscene music.
Told you to sit down and get down. I'm about to hit ground when I'm in the box. My head's way out of this bounds. Nobody's stopping me. You know it's ain't right. Most of your love for me. Doing it all night. I thought I told you to sit down and get down. I'm about to hit ground when I'm in the box. My head's way out of this bounds. Nobody's stopping me. You know it's ain't right. Most of your love for me. Doing it all night.
As we said before, the answer on PS2 is probably not as difficult as you had heard, in the same way that tactics in Fez aren't nearly as much of a bane as you may have heard. However, direct control is pretty great, and Reload saves you so much time with its gameplay changes and additions, and then substitutes save time with more interactions among your friends, though there is an argument to be made that it's undertuned in difficulty, and possibly that there is too much exposition. The writing changes can be controversial. I can't really dig deeper into it without delving into spoilers and alienating the viewer here for an answer to which version to play. And if you are wary of spoilers, be careful with the comments. While there may be an argument as to whether Reload is definitive or not, it is for sure the easiest to recommend and the most accessible. But how Persona 3 was back on PS2 was such a different game, and I think that should be respected. And because of that, the recommendation for Reload does have a couple of asterisks tied to it, about missing out on X, Y, or Z aspects of it, even if those aren't entirely relevant to new players. Now with Persona 3 hopefully finished for a long time, we'll be covering Persona 5 and hopefully Dragon Quest 3 before the end of the year. And as always, thank you for watching and thank you to my patrons and YouTube members for their continued support.